Albert, thank you very much, and many thanks to each and every one of you for attending the general membership meeting of our Cooperative and Condominium Advisory Council this evening. The Board of Directors of the Co-op and Condo Council really puts a lot of thought and a lot of deliberation into coming up with meeting topics. And I feel, and by the number of people we have here this evening, we counted 56, I feel the CCAC board did a great job in coming up with the topic for this evening, reviewing budget preparation processes for boards of directors of co-ops and condos. It's something a co-op and condo complex faces each and every year, and it's something that we need to cover on a periodic basis for our member co-op boards and our member condo boards, as well as our property management boards. We have a great panel, and I'll ask the panel to come to the dais now. We have a great panel. Mindy Eisenberg Stark, a certified public accountant and a certified fraud examiner. She is the principal of MES CPA CFE. Please welcome Mindy. We also have two property manager members. They are members of our Advisory Council of Managing Agents. Brian Scally, who is a board member of the Advisory Council of Managing Agents. He is also the Vice President and Director of Management for Garthchester Realty. And we also have Joe Rodriguez, another member of ACMA, the Advisory Council of Managing Agents. And he is the Assistant Controller for Ferrara Management Group, also known as FMG. We have a great panel. We'll call on Mindy Eisenberg Stark to get things rolling, and then we'll have Brian and Joe add any comments or field any questions that you may have. We have two wireless mics, so we won't have to ask you to speak louder. We'll just hand you the mic, and that's for the question and answer period. So you'll be very well heard for that. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome Mindy Eisenberg Stark.
Good evening.
There's a little knob right there, and then we'll have both of them.
Hello?
You take this for the audience.
All right.
And if you'd like to speak at the podium or describe
I can speak at the podium.
Okay.
Sure.
And then I'll use this for the other half
Not
of
a
the room.
problem.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, thank you. Just in case. Good evening. By way of introduction, my name is Mindy Eisenberg Stark. I am both a certified public accountant and a certified fraud examiner. And my firm has a niche market in the co-op and condo industry. I started off as the head of the tenants committee during the conversion of a 180-unit building that I lived in. The day the red herring came out, for those of you who were there during the initial conversions, fear struck in the building, and somehow I found myself at the forefront of, at the ripe old age of about 23, negotiating with the sponsor for the best deal for my fellow neighbors, and went on to serve on the board of that co-op for 8 years until I bought my own home. I have been servicing the co-op and condo community for about 30 years, and we currently audit about 100 properties throughout the New York metropolitan area. As well as the forensic side, I have been a consultant at the District Attorney's Office in White Plains for 12 years in their Economic Crime Division as a client of my firm, and we have dealt with quite a bit of white-collar crime. So that's who I am. So I'm here to talk to you tonight about the budgeting process. So just so I understand the audience, how many of you are on the boards of co-ops or condos? Okay. And how many in the group are management companies? And I guess the rest are vendors servicing the co-op and condo community. Okay. So how many of those who are on boards have already signed, sealed, and delivered their 2018 budget? Just a handful. How many are in the process? 1, 2. And how many haven't even started to think about it yet? Okay. Right. I am always amazed at how many of the co-ops that we work with do not have their budget set by November, because in order to do a January 1 increase or make an announcement that, hooray, there's not going to be any, generally you need to give shareholders at least 30 days notice so they can adjust their own personal budgets. And management has an opportunity to adjust the billing, because typically management billing goes out around the 20th to the 25th of the month. So we are now at this November 14th, so we're getting close. So I think this topic is very, very timely, and let's dig in and talk about the budgeting process. So basically, in a co-op, about 90% of your costs are fixed. We have real estate taxes, we have the mortgage, we have salaries, we have insurance, we have water and sewer, we have workers' compensation. So really, we're not starting in the dark. We're not really starting with a zero budget. We're starting with almost all of the boxes filled in. Because what we're going to do is we're going to look at the prior 2-3 years, because we have lots of experience, because there are very few new co-op conversions, and other than a new condominium, most of you have lots and lots of data and lots of history to base it on. Now, who's going to start the budget process for you? Generally, I've seen it done in a number of ways. One, sometimes written into our engagement with the co-op, is we do the first cut of it, and then we send it on over to management, who puts in the things they know that we might not know. So for example, repairs that have to be done over the year, new contracts that are going to be entered into. But we generally put side by side the audited financials for the last number of years, get information year to date. So for example, we take September actuals of 2017, and we would try and project out to the end of the year, and then start putting in the numbers for 2018. The other way I've seen it done is that management produces the budget, and that's probably the more common way. And some managers have very sophisticated programs with lots and lots of tabs, where they can show you, fuel and oil consumption for a number of years and union contracts, and, they really back up their numbers. And then sometimes the boards are working on those budgets, and then turn them over to either myself or the management to take a look at them. But however it is that you decide to do it, recognize that most of the job is pretty much done by the time you sit down and you start working on it. The things that are going to really change and are really going to vary is, other than your repair and maintenance programs, like your elevator contracts, your exterminating contracts, your lawn contracts, your, the gardener, the lawn, and other things that you basically know in advance. It's basically going to be, do we have any big plumbing jobs that we have to do this year? Do we have any painting work that we're going to do? Are we going to do, hallways? Are we going to fix the pool? Are we going to work on the meeting room? Those are really the variables in the budget. But how do we do a budget? Most of us, when we sit down and we do our own budget, we start with what we know we make, and then we try and figure out how we're going to make that work. What are we going to cut in order to be able to afford to live our lifestyle on, because most of us are on fixed income, on the income that we make. In a co-op and a condo, the budget is the exact opposite process. We start at the bottom and we work our way up to the top. So we have to figure out what our expenditures are going to be, and then we need to be able to fix the revenue so that we balance our budget. Now, I can't tell you how many co-ops and/or condos I see who decide that balancing the budget is not a very high priority for them. There are still co-ops and condos who are running deficits and have decided that they're going to be using reserve funds in order to supplement the deficits in their budget. To them I say, not a good plan, because ultimately that day is going to come when you are going to need to raise the maintenance, and at that point you're going to need to put in a 10, 15, 20% maintenance increase, and you are going to have a riot on your hands. That will be the one annual meeting, I guarantee you, you will have a quorum without any doubt whatsoever. Because nothing riles up your shareholders to come to the annual meeting more than a maintenance increase. So I personally am a fan of having small increases on an annual basis so people get used to the fact that expenses do go up. Especially 2018, it's going to be a little bit of a hard sell to increase maintenance because we've seen a tremendous decrease in fuel costs due to the fact that we had a very, very mild winter in 2016, and the cost of oil went down dramatically. So I'm seeing huge swings in the amount of expenditures for fuel and gas consumption. But I'm a big fan of number one, making balancing that budget a top priority, and two, getting people used to the fact that those buildings who keep their maintenance the same for 10 years, the day you're going to have to increase that maintenance, it's not going to be a happy day. The other thing that we see very often is back from the old days, is buildings still have fuel assessments in place. Now we all know that no one is assessing for fuel anymore because fuel costs have gone down. But it's basically a marker, a placeholder for a maintenance increase. And I've really tried to educate my boards that that really needs to become a permanent part of the maintenance because that piece is not going away. If it didn't go away when fuel went to about 75% to a half of where it had been in 2014, it needs to be there as a permanent part of the budget. So we have educated our boards and in turn educated the shareholders that when we increase maintenance 7% but we take away the fuel assessment, in fact we're really not raising their monthly costs. We're really just having a more realistic budget so that there's not this pie in the sky hope that that fuel assessment is going to go away. It's very, very hard to justify it. So those are really the elements of the operating budget. And there's another very important component to the budget, and that is capital budgeting. And by that I mean making sure that if you have upcoming projects that need to be done on the property of more of a long-term nature or capital project, that you are taking a good look at the availability of credit lines, when your mortgage is coming due to be refinanced, how much is in your reserve account, and whether you need to start developing those reserves by having either an increase in your maintenance costs so that you can start saving and putting money away, or whether having an assessment to increase the reserve account is a necessary part of your budget. The last thing you want to be doing is knowing that you have an elevator project coming up in 2 years and all you've got is about $30,000 in the bank and you have no credit line in place and you really don't know where the money's going to come from and that elevator isn't going to pass inspection. So it's not just thinking for the next 12 months, but it's really thinking with a real head towards running the building as a business. When you take a position on this, on the board, you are acting in a fiduciary capacity for all of the shareholders in the building. One of the things I find all too often is that the board starts thinking with their own pocketbook and not what's in the best interest of the building as a whole. So those on the board that don't want to pay more maintenance become more reluctant to put through a maintenance increase because they're concerned about how they're going to afford it. But by the same token, you need to be realistic, and I say this very often, is that you can't run a telethon to raise money to run your building. The only way you're going to get the money to run your building in an appropriate manner is from either the unit owners or from the shareholders. And so the budget becomes a very, very important process for the board, working with their professionals to make sure that the budget is balanced. And now is the time, if you have not already started working on it, now really is the time that you need to start working on it. So you need to approach your professionals, you need to approach your management company, and you really need to sit down and start, sharpening the pencils and looking at the reality of what your budgets look like. Thank you.
Mindy, thank you very much. Brian or Joe, do you have any additional remarks that you might want to add in terms of Mindy's presentation, or any additional thoughts from the property management perspective?
Well, yeah, I'll jump up.
All right, we'll start with Brian Scally of Garthchester Realty.
Hi, Brian Scally, Garthchester Realty. Give a little background about myself, and Mindy stole my speech, by the way. But the budget process is pretty much all the same as we can talk about. But I actually started my career as a superintendent of building in Westchester County. Garthchester was managing my building. I moved into management too many years ago, and about 2.5 years ago I became a partner in the business. So nice transition. I think a unique ability for myself that I started as a super, so I know the nuances of a building, so it really assists me and our company in the budgeting process. And I mention that because we involve in Garthchester our property managers in the budgeting process. So when it starts, we'll have our accountants start to draft, and our internal payables and what everybody work on the first draft of the budget, and our property managers will work on the repair and maintenance side of the budget. And we do that because they have the inside knowledge of the building. They know the nuances. They know if there's a plumbing issue in the building, should I increase the plumbing line next year, or was it completed already so I can kind of decrease it? We look at the history, the 3-year history, 4-year, 5-year. We bring it in so we know going forward we need an increase, we don't need an increase. The idea of small little incremental increases is a good idea. Mindy hit on a really important point, capital improvements. Many buildings don't think about them because they're large ticket items. So they'll finance them through a refi. So when they refinance the building, we'll do a boiler, we'll do a roof, but I don't want to put X amount of dollars in my reserve fund because it's going to raise my maintenance a lot. And that's hard sell to the shareholders, and the board members don't want to do that because it's difficult. But at Garthchester, what we've been trying to do is provide a 10-year capital plan. So we'll explain there's X number of years left on our roof, our elevator, our windows, our hallway renovation, so on and so forth. And then how many years are left, and it's going to cost us X amount of dollars per year. If the board would like to put away money for that, at least we're giving information. We're providing information to the boards so they can make an educated decision when we implement the budget. So this year may be a little bit tighter, but next year we know we're really going to have to start the budget for that. So we're, like Mindy said, we're not thinking for 3 months about a budget, we're thinking for a year, or 2 years, or 3 years down the road, because we know those items are coming up, and they're looming, they're coming. We know at some point we're going to have to do a roof, or an elevator, or windows. So we have to plan for those. One thing we also do, we provide a pie chart to the board and to the shareholders. Because when we provide the pie chart, it really shows, as Mindy said, small component of the budget can actually be manipulated, the repair and maintenance side of the budget. So that pie chart will show us 20% is our insurance and 39% is mortgage and X1. When we get to repairs and maintenance, it's 8%, 10%, 3%, 6%. So when people realize that, that's very difficult to change and amend your budget to get it balanced. So giving people the information and the tools and being able to see it really helps us going forward and presenting the board and selling it, quite frankly, to the shareholders as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, Joe. Last but certainly not least.
That's why you have to go last, right? There's only so much you can talk about budgets. So I'm George Rodriguez. I'm from the Ferrara Management Group, the only AMO accredited property management company in Westchester. And my background is I used to work for Verizon. I was in engineering. Before that, I was actually doing some construction for Verizon. Went over to a fiber optic company where we were international. I did budgets for large construction jobs. Then we switched over, we're doing some budgets for IT jobs as well. And then joined for our management in 2014 and became assistant controller. And I actually love working in spreadsheets. I could do it all day long. I'm one of the ones that Mindy said, you know, I like to have 5 tabs in there showing the payroll. And not every property wants to see that. The only thing I can say differently from what they've said already is I like to take a more holistic approach when I'm doing the budgets. You know, all the buildings, you know, they're brick and mortar, but they don't have their own personality. And I think that's the important part to get to that will help you create a better budget. You know, people get all tense when you talk about budget time, and mostly it's because they're all worried about the numbers. But the reality is, you know, doing a budget is a freeing experience because it helps you understand what the numbers are. Everybody wants to hide and, you know, just tell me, am I positive, am I in the red? But once you understand, it helps you explain a lot easier to the rest of your owners what the costs are. I typically like to be, I do 2 tabs on the spreadsheet. One is for the board, which is an extreme breakdown of all the line items. And then they all roll up to the categories on the outward-facing budget that the banks see and that they distribute. And I find that definitely helps the board members understand where the costs are going. And again, as was pointed out, what money you should be putting towards reserve for your long-term capital projects. But again, so that's about it. They kind of covered all my stuff. All my check marks are checked off. So, any questions?
I have one more thing.
I think that another very important part of the budgeting process is education. So most of the time when there's a big increase, who do they ask to present it at the shareholder meeting? Not the management company. Moi. So I have, you know, stood in front of many shareholder groups at an annual meeting or at a finance meeting and had to break the bad news about, you know, some of these deferred maintenance increases and how much maintenance is going to go up. And, you know, there's that dreaded moment and the drum roll and, you know, we tell them. Most of the time, when you educate the shareholders about why you need to raise the maintenance, and you do a detailed explanation and you explain variances, or you have intersecting lines and you show that, you know, maintenance has kind of crept like this, but the expenses have kind of gone like this, and, you know, it's created this deficit. Reasonable shareholders, and we all know that not every shareholder is a reasonable shareholder, but reasonable unit owners and reasonable shareholders will come to understand why the maintenance does need to keep pace with the cost of inflation and why it needs to keep pace with the way that the expenses are increasing. You're always going to get those who are going to gripe, you're always going to get those that are going to complain, but really you can't fear those individuals because you really do need to do what's in the best interest of the building as a whole. So I think that, you know, another very important component to the budget process is the education piece, that if you're going to be making any kind of sizable increase or decent increase, or it's the first time you're putting in an increase, it needs to go along with initially a letter and then generally a, you know, town hall meeting to explain why that increase is necessary.
Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Joe. Okay, question and answers. We will start with one of our.
I don't have a question. My name is Judy Giuliano, and I work with D&D Elevator. And I love what you said about capital planning. And we want to be brought in on that, especially with your elevators, because there's so many code changes being made. Say, in 2020, every elevator must have a door lock, so monitoring device, every single one. So that has to be a capital plan for every elevator that you have in your building. So please, I loved what you said about that your tenants are aware and they know that there might be a code change and money may need to be put aside. So don't hesitate to bring your vendors in on that too. It's just, we want to be there. We want to make sure they're prepared.
Thank you.
Cesar Manfredi, CCAC board member.
Yeah, saving for a capital plan or setting aside for the reserve, that's all taxable income as I remember. And is there, someone told me that if you call it an assessment, it's not a taxable income. Could the CPA ever do a little explanation of taxable income when you put it in the reserve fund?
Sure.
Or saving,
Sure.
Did you see the two managing agents look to her, by the way?
When we deal with co-ops and condos in general, we don't really worry about taxes. And the reason why most co-op and condos don't worry about taxes is that, number one, condominiums can fill out what's called an 1120H, where basically they are only taxed on their income that comes from sources outside their unit owners, which is typically just their interest income. And then they do get to allocate expenses against that interest income, and most astute accountants can get that taxable income down to pretty much nothing. In terms of co-ops, up until recently, we have virtually not had any co-ops that paid federal income taxes because you had the depreciation as a shelter against the income. The state is not based on income generally. It's based upon the capital basis, which is really your assets minus your liabilities. And what you need to use for assets is you need to back out the book value of your property, which is what would show as the historical cost from when you bought it. And you need to add in the fair market value, generally based upon what the town has estimated your building is worth. So very rarely does the income, the tax on the income, exceed the tax on the capital basis. In New York City, that has changed a little. I don't know if anyone is in the city, but it's changed a little because they have basically done a $10,000 exclusion on the capital tax. So we find some buildings are being taxed on their income if they do not have sufficient depreciation. In terms of assessments, the nice thing about a capital assessment is that when you have a capital assessment, the shareholders can add that assessment to their basis, meaning their purchase price. So for example, if you paid $95,000 for your apartment because you bought it, many years ago, and now it's worth $500,000, any assessments that are put in for capital purposes can add to that $95,000 number so that when you sell your apartment, you'll have less of a gain. But again, that has not had as much impact since Congress passed the rule that a single individual can exempt $250,000 of gain on the sale of their co-op or condo, and a married couple can exempt $500,000. So for book purposes, an assessment is income. For tax purposes, it is not. So I hope that answers your question.
Stuart Bethel.
Thank you. This is in the vein of the capital improvement concept. All the annual reports have a clause in it, which I'm sure many of us know, that asks the question, does the co-op know the stated longevity of any particular equipment or infrastructure item? I wonder if the panel could comment on the lack of, I believe, most boards to address that issue, sort of sticking their heads in the sand, because what you don't know can't hurt you. So if you could comment on that, I think that would be a good thing.
Sure. A number of years ago, the AICPA, which is the American Institute for Certified Public Accountants, came out with an audit guide to what are called CIRAs. Believe it or not, all of you who live in co-ops and condos, you live in a CIRA, which is a Common Interest Realty Association. And what the AICPA said is that what they wanted to have in the financial statement is basically an engineering report that breaks down the components of the building into its major parts, plumbing, foundation, roof, boiler, etc., and put together a chart that shows those components, their estimated useful life, how much is estimated they would cost to replace, and how the CIRA is funding towards those replacements. It was really prompted by the fact that in California and in Florida, condominiums have mandatory reserve funding requirements, meaning that they need to do this in order to be in accordance with state statutes. The New York community, where almost all co-ops are, has vehemently said that that report should not be part of the financial statements because an engineering study has no place in a financial statement. And if we did that with the aging co-op stock here in New York, no one would ever buy a co-op because we would be looking at buildings that are 30, 40, 50 years old, and we would have to start guesstimating what was coming down the pike. And there are many, many components of a multifamily building that we can't see, touch, or feel. And if something happened to those and they were not in the study, that the co-op board could be liable for the fact that that was not disclosed. So when you look at the financial statements for a co-op or condo in New York, you will see on page 1, emphasis of the matter, on the opinion page. And basically what it says is that the co-op has not presented as part of its financial statements the study of major repairs and improvements, and that it is not part of the financials even though the ACMA has suggested that it be. And then there's generally a footnote to the financial statements that says that, especially in the co-op, that the board has the ability to borrow, assess, or defer those projects until the funds are available. And in the condominium, similar language in that they will assess increased common charges, and or now condos can borrow for those types of projects, although it's a little more difficult. So it's very typical, you're not going to see it. Although, just because you put that language into your financial statements does not mean that the board should stick its head in the sand and should not be aware of the major components of its building and what will need servicing. This comes up most often when you're looking to do a refinance on the underlying mortgage on a building. And we always say that that's your bite of the apple. When you go to refinance, you need to look at a 10-year capital plan, which is generally the term of most underlying co-op mortgages. And you really need to understand what kind of funds you're going to need within the next 10 years in order to be able to maintain your fiscal plan. And the reason that that becomes so important is because unlike the mortgage on your apartment, which you can basically refinance every time the rates go down, as long as you're creditworthy, the underlying mortgage on a co-op carries a significant prepayment penalty if you try and pay it off before it comes due. So no, you should not stick your head in the sand, although you will not see that as part of a financial statement. And I get this question all the time is, what do you mean the board's not looking at this? What do you mean they're not thinking about it? Well, they are, they should be, even though the language says that it's not part of these statements.
Okay, can I get that? So, I just want to add on to the concept of the capital plan. It's not a static plan. So, and that's why at a minimum it should be 5 years, but ideally you're looking at 10 to 15 years. And as you're moving forward, it's revolving. So those dates that you're worried about, hey, when is the roof going to expire? That's actually already embedded in your capital plan. So it's no longer a question. As you're rolling along, you're looking down 10 years, 20 years and saying, all right, we know we got to do the roofs over there, or the boiler, we just did the boiler this many years ago. That's the whole concept of keeping your capital plan and then making sure that you have the reserves and or whatever you need to assess to catch up to that money you're going to need in 5 years and in 7 years. So that money, while it's not, it's not officially documented anywhere, you're gonna have it every time you review that budget. Every year, you're gonna go into it, and you're gonna look at it, and you'll alter it. You start off with a wish list, what exactly you wanna do, and then reality sets in of what money you have available. That becomes your living, breathing capital plan, so that it's all there in front of you.
Other questions?
I would like, by the way, Joe, just hold on one second. I would like to add a couple of things to that, if I may. Jeff, you put together an excellent program, I think it was last year, on capital planning.
Yes.
And how to fund it, how to plan for it, and seeing it through. And I think you had an architect, engineer, CPA, I don't know if Mindy was part of that, but it was an excellent program. That's all on our website.
That is correct.
So if you want to see an equally excellent program to this one, specifically on capital planning, check it out. If you have trouble finding it, please call Jeff. Jeff and Maggie are the tech experts. I'm still in the 19th century. Secondly, before we get to Joe, I don't know if you noticed, do you want to give everyone half of the room? Because I'm making a statement. I don't know if you noticed, Jeff's half of the room has had 3 questions. So far, it's 3-0. I'm very grateful to Joe McCarthy for raising his hand. I'd like to see a little bit more action on my team here. Okay. Joe.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, what I would like to ask, what I would like to ask Mindy, you mentioned mortgage refinancing, and I refinanced our mortgage twice in the last 15 years, keeping the same payment, going from 8% to 5% to 4%, and walking away with hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't see that happening in the future because I see mortgage rates rising, and I think we're not going to be able to walk away with the money the way we did in the past few years. What is your opinion of that?
So just on Sunday, I did a whole seminar on refinancing the underlying mortgage for the Council of New York Cooperatives and Condos. I sat on a panel with a lawyer and a mortgage broker and a banker. So we have, we have had an era of decreasing rates, although I think that they have pretty much bottomed out at this point. I don't have a crystal ball. If I could predict the future, like Sports Illustrated did with who was going to win the 2017 World Series, I wouldn't be standing here. I'd be retired and on a beach somewhere. But one of the issues with mortgage refinancing, when we talk about capital projects, is that if anyone is still sitting with a high interest rate mortgage, you really need to look at the ROI, or the return on investment, and weigh what the prepayment penalty is, because some of them are very excessive. There's one called a yield maintenance penalty, where they can be extremely high. Those that have a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1% of the outstanding balance, maybe not so. But we have seen, as Joe mentioned, a lot of buildings that have been extremely successful in lowering their interest rate, even though they had to pay a prepayment penalty, but that the decrease in the payment was sufficient that it more than made up for the penalty, and they were able to take additional equity out of the building and use that for future capital projects. Most buildings' mortgages are while they may seem like a very large number to those of us who have mortgages on our own individual units or homes, in comparison to the actual worth of the building, the mortgages are really very, very small. So that most buildings use the equity in those buildings, and we're talking only about co-ops because this doesn't apply to condos. They use the equity in the building to be able to fund future capital projects. But I do want to caution, and I said from the very outset, that I do not believe that you should be using the proceeds of refinancing in order to fund deficit spending as part of your operating budget. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
Other questions? Sorry. Other questions?
Jason, you're close to leaving.
question, but I do want to make a quick comment from an insurance perspective. With respect to sidewalks, driveways, roofs, and fuses or certain types of outdated or dangerous circuit breakers, if your building is deferring maintenance on those types of projects, and in particular with respect to driveways or sidewalks or roofs, you're just saying, oh, we'll patch it, we'll patch it, we'll patch it, sooner or later your insurance company, especially if it's an astute insurance company that's coming out and inspecting your building periodically, is going to make a quote recommendation that you make that repair. And after making the recommendation, they may allow it to the end of the insurance policy to the expiration. Sometimes they'll float into the next renewal. But sooner or later, they're going to say, if you don't make that repair or upgrade, we're not going to renew you. And you'll say, well, that's fine, my broker will just go out and find a new insurance carrier to handle my building. Well, that may be the case, but you may pay a lot more money for the insurance carrier. The coverages might not be as good. And guess what? The new insurance company is going to come out and inspect your building. They might find the exact same thing, and then you're in a real conundrum, because when a new insurance company comes out after writing your policy and they inspect afterwards, you have 60 days. If they want, after making their inspection and they give you written notice, you don't make that repair, they can cancel you within 60 days, and then you're really stuck, because now you're like in no man's land. You got out of your first insurance company, you went to the new one, they don't want you either, you're going to have a hard time finding insurance. So something to think about with respect to capital budgeting that the panelists have been talking about. Thanks.
I would also like to ask regarding all that's going on in Washington right now, regarding tax reform or whatever. I know everything's in a state of flux, but inasmuch as what you've heard and how you've been following it, are there implications, I would imagine, for co-op boards, condo boards, and unit owners?
Some of the tax proposals would have an extremely negative impact here in New York. Items that are on the table are the elimination of the state and local income tax deduction, and New York has one of the highest state and local income tax rates in the country. Also, the elimination of the property tax deduction, which has been one of the beautiful parts about living in a co-op. It's a very unique structure in that it's the only one I know where you can take a deduction twice. The co-op gets to take the deduction at the corporate level, and then the individuals get to take their pro rata share of the same deduction at the individual level. So that may go away as well, which would have an impact on your shareholders, and also obviously owners of condominiums. And the third is that they're looking to cap the mortgage interest deduction to interest only on $500,000 in terms of the individual mortgages. I'm not sure what impact that will have on the co-ops, but in new construction here in Westchester, certainly anyone who's already an existing owner would be grandfathered in under the current proposals, but anyone who's looking to buy would basically be capped at $500,000 of mortgage principal. It doesn't just have tax implications, it has real estate implications as well, because a lot of these deductions are the reasons why people buy real estate, because when you rent, there is no deduction. When you own, there is. And most of the time the question I get in my office, because we also have a fairly robust tax practice, is should I buy so I'll get deductions? My answer usually is you should buy if you want to buy, because it's very expensive and it's more difficult to be a homeowner than a renter. But I think that if some of these proposals do go through, it will have impact on the value of probably your largest investment, which is your home. So stay tuned. I think we're in for a wild ride. I understand today they've even tried to attach the Affordable Care Act as part of the tax bill, because they're saying that if they eliminate it, it might save dollars that can be used to further reduce taxes. So it will be interesting what comes down, but if you can prepay your real estate taxes, I suggest you do it this year in 2017.
Let me just comment on one thing. I think Jason hit on something as we're coming into or completing, those of you that haven't completed the budget process, Jason mentioned deferred maintenance. So as we're planning, and we've all probably been in boards where we're trying to get to a zero increase or as minimal as we possibly can, and as I mentioned, repairs and maintenance are going to be the line items that we're going to decrease. And we've seen this where, put it off, we'll do it next budget, we'll delay it, let's wait, I don't want to do an increase. Jason, 100% right, don't defer it because, number one, it could be a liability, very importantly. Number two, it's going to cost you more in the long run because the job is only going to get bigger and cause more damage. So think about, I said, when a property manager is doing the repair and maintenance portion of our budgets, they're forecasting, they're thinking about what needs to be done to make the property safe and for all shareholders. So just to keep in mind for those of you that haven't completed it yet.
I actually have a question for Jason, and that is, should the boards be looking at increased insurance costs in the aftermath of all of the natural disasters that we've looked at? Because I know that after 9/11, insurance rates did go up, and in light of all of the hurricane claims and some of the other disasters, are insurance companies looking to raise rates in order to make profits?
So that's been a fairly common question, and I think relatively good news is that the insurance companies, and all of you know, you've heard from me and probably from your insurance brokers, that there are roughly a half dozen insurance companies that probably handle 80 or 90% of all of the condos and co-op buildings in New York. Those insurance carriers, the Greater New Yorks, the Travelers, the Admirals, the Firemen's Funds, the Philadelphias, etc. of the world, were relatively minimal impact and exposure to those hurricanes. So while those insurance companies' reinsurance costs will go up because they do have some exposure to hurricane-prone areas, while those reinsurance costs will go up and those will affect rates somewhat, I don't expect anywhere near the shock value that 9/11 introduced into the insurance landscape. I mean, in very general terms, and you should check with your insurance broker because there are a lot of other things that go into your insurance premium budgeting besides just what I'm talking about. But in very general terms, all other things being equal, I think that a conservative budget would be for a 3 to 5%, if you can see your way fit to put a 5% increase in your insurance budget, that would be safe. Everything else being equal, not including if your building has fuses, like I mentioned, or a bad roof, or deferred maintenance that an insurance company might bring up, or you have some other unique characteristic of your building that makes you're near the water or something like that, that makes it even a more restrictive market for you. I think that 5% is a very conservative, solid budget number for insurance. Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions?
Oh, yes. Jeff just mentioned 4 things.
James Interza.
It really is.
So I'm an engineer. I was also a board member for 5 years in Mamaroneck, so I've done kind of both sides of the issues here with capital planning. And as a board member, I was really struck by, you don't come to the table generally with an experience and education to do capital planning. A lot of my peers came from different fields that really had nothing to do with construction and engineering. So we worked with our property manager, and I think we did an okay job, but it really reinforced for me the importance of working with engineers and architects to capital plan. If for no other reason, but to prioritize. So I did a lot of restoration work in the city, and very frequently we would come to these properties that were doing these grand lobby renovations or beautification programs, and they had leaky roofs and other priorities. So work with engineers and architects, I would encourage you just to prioritize it for no other reason. Keep records of your capital improvements. So we do a lot of capital reserve studies, and one of the biggest issues is there's no record of how old all of your roofs are with garden style apartment, or the last time you did an overhaul of your boiler, things like that.
And the last thing I would say is look at leveraging your capital improvements to reduce your operating expenses. Look at doing energy audits, energy efficiency improvements. There are a lot of ways to invest in your property to actually lower expenses and make the smart use of those investments. And again, engineers and architects can guide you to make good decisions. I've walked into properties that had very great intentions. Recently, a property that was installing triple pane windows. And this is a 1950s style property where triple pane windows was really not the right investment to make. They really need to insulate their attics. Would have been a much better bang for the buck. They didn't know that, and they spent a lot of extra money doing an unnecessary improvement. And they had a lot of other things that really need to be attended to. So I would absolutely encourage you to make the investment in speaking to architects and engineers. It's a hard sell for us because you don't get something directly from it, a service that does not result in a new roof or a nice new facade, but it's strategic planning to help you make better decisions, and I really think it's worth the investment.
Okay, last call. Questions? Howard?
I was listening to the importance of capital planning, capital investment infrastructure. And of course, anybody following this on a national scale knows what I think somebody said, the deterioration is going this way, and the attention to infrastructure on a national scale is barely a pulse right now. I think the American Society of Civil Engineers gave the country yet again, I think, the 4th consecutive annual D+ rating. So, and I'm not being facetious about it, I'm dead serious, that unfortunately we started the year with the hope that this problem would finally be resolved. So the importance of, I'm tying it back to all of you and your buildings and your position of responsibility and the advisors of saying the property managers, take care of your infrastructure, and when you're safely ensconced at the end of the day, we are avoiding monster potholes and terrible signage and terrible lighting. This is what's happening to our nation's infrastructure. When we get home safe and sound, and you're safely ensconced, and you're well planned, well equipped, well budgeted, co-op or condo unit, thank God that you at least have a well-planned place to go to, because every day, and this is no exaggeration, depending on how long you commute and where you commute from, it's a jungle out there, and it's getting worse. So, Caesar.
Yeah, go back on your original briefing when you started the meeting about the change in the board of legislators. What major issue, you don't have to mention one, what major issue was being held at bay in the previous administration that is now in jeopardy with the new administration?
Well, without going into too much, it's
just one issue.
But, let's take the mandatory co-op, disclosure issue. Now, it's not only us. I mean, on a broader scale, this is happening in Albany, it's happening in the county, and quite recently, I received a communication. I received a communication from Mary Ann Rothman, head of the Mammoth Council of New York Cooperatives. And by the way, it's not only the Council of New York Cooperatives, which is, I believe, primarily in Manhattan, but she's got alliances with the 5 boroughs. They each have their own little, I shouldn't say little, far exceeds us in size. And they're having a battle royal right now, and we're helping them with New York City legislation along the same lines. So that's just one issue. So as I said before, knock on wood, we have the resources to go to court and battle if we have to. But that's just one. I mean, there are property rights issues. There are legitimate calls for reform in the SECRA review process, the State Environmental Quality Review process. So there are a lot of these things which, just take the environmental side, the other side, the Democratic side, is quite passionate about. I won't say it's understandable, but, they're no less fervent environmentalists in Connecticut or Massachusetts or New Jersey, but they seem to have, based on the feedback we get from builders in those areas, they seem to have a bit more progressive view towards property rights, and somehow, environmental interests and property rights and builder interests seem to coexist better than in New York. New York is one of the toughest states, I don't have to tell you all, it's one of the toughest states to do business in almost any field except maybe yogurt. But so anyway, it's a battle on multiple fronts, and before we were at some might argue that a standstill is not a victory, but a standstill still is a victory in my book if we're able to block the bad stuff that could hurt us. But it may not no longer be a standstill. We may have to, as Admiral says, kick it up a notch in terms of what we do legally or otherwise.
Last call for questions. I would like you all to join with me and Diana Rill and Albert and Maggie in thanking our panel. What a tremendous job. Mindy, Eisenberg, Ryan Scally, Joe Rodriguez, many thanks. Excellent program.